Hello. So, my topic was competency to plead guilty. So, here's the introduction. So, competency to plead guilty. According to the book, the textbook, I kind of paraphrase the definition. A defendant's abilities, mental and cognitive ability, to understand the legal process, the charges against them, and the consequence of pleading guilty. More than 90% of all criminal cases are resolved through a guilty plea rather than through a verdict reached after a trial. So we need to know the difference between competency to plead guilty and the competence to stand trial. So the plea guilty, the purpose is to ensure the defendant can make an informed, rational decision about whether to plead guilty, understand the consequence of plead guilty. And then stand trial, the purpose is to ensure a defendant can mentally understand the legal process and able to assist in their own defense. And so the main difference between here is that plea guilty, the defendant needs to know and understand the plea and the legal process. In the stand trial, the defendants need to mentally know, have the mental state of knowing of the legal process and then able to assist in their defense. So that is the main difference. So we cannot confuse those two. Even though they kind of go together, we need to know the difference. So the legal standards. A defendant must understand these three key elements of the criminal process. So the first one, the nature of the charge to which they are pleading. Second, the potential penalties for the charge. And lastly, the right they are giving up by pleading guilty. And the rights are to remain silent, confront one's accusers, jury trial and trial counsel, etc. And any plea must be knowing, intelligent, well as volunteer, and that is important. So the cognitive ability, the defendant's ability to understand and process information regarding to the legal process. That's very key. Next is rational decision making. The defendant's ability to make decisions based on a rational thought process and on assess to this situation. Legal understanding, defendant's understanding of the potential outcome of plead guilty versus going to trial. So they need to know what they are choosing. The voluntariness of the plea, that is to ensure the defendant's decision to plead guilty is made voluntarily without any influence from the judge or their attorney, jury, whatever. It needs to be on the defendant's own understanding and decision. So I kind of repeat myself from the last slide, but it's just really important that we understand the elements to plead guilty. So understanding the plea, the knowing, the court and the psychiatrist needs to know if the defendant understands what they are pleading guilty to and what it means, the outcome, because it will affect their life. There is an assessment tool called the MACAT-CA that will determine that. And then reasons for the plea, well reasoned. According to the textbook, when the defendant understands the process and gives rational reasons for a plea while being logical and clear, it shows that they are competent to plead guilty. And then so the reason why it's so important is that it's the purpose of knowing involuntary inquiry. By contract, it is to determine whether the defendant actually does understand the significance and consequence of a particular decision and whether the decision is uncoerced. It is very important because we want the defendant know all the facts before they decide to give up their rights. And yeah, so assessment use. As we stated, there's this tool called MACAT CA. It's a structured assessment tool used to determine defendant's competency to stand trial and to plead guilty. This assessment will help the evaluator if the defendants understand the legal process, the charge against them, and the consequences of pleading guilty. Also, it also helps the differentiate between rational and irrational ones, meaning whether a defendant has a mental ability to make informed and rational decision that can alter their life forever. So, in the textbook, it provided one of the case. I only did one for the sake of time. This case is called Gazan and Moran. Quick background. So, August 2nd, Tom shot and killed a bartender, a patrol at a bar in Nevada, then stole cash from the register. And then 9 days later, he shot his wife multiple times and attempted a suicide, but it failed. And so in this case, the court questioned whether the defendant, Tom, must be competent to stand trial and also competent to waive certain legal rights, including the right to trial and plead guilty. So the issue in this case that is presented is that the defendant was found competent to stand trial, but when he wanted to plead guilty, the court questioned if he needed to be mentally competent to be granted a competent to plead guilty. Because he murdered so many people, was his mental state there? So the Supreme Court stated that if an individual is competent to stand trial, understanding what's happening in court and able to help in their defense, they are also considered competent to plead guilty. The same mental competency standard applies to both. So that's the outcome, is that if the defendant is competent in both areas, able to understand the legal process, mentally able to decide to plead guilty, then it should be fine. So, outside the textbook case, I found this case. This woman in Michigan, Mitchell Blair, age 36, was convicted of murder of her two children, a 13-year-old daughter, a 19-year-old son. And she put their bodies in their freezer, their home's freezer. And so Blair is charged with first-degree murder, torture, and child abuse. Blair was found mentally competent to stand trial and chose to plead guilty, even accept the death penalty if their state, Michigan, had one. So the issue in this case, is that Blair had a history of mental health issue and abuse. So when she stated that she wanted to plead guilty to her charges, the court and the judge, it raised some question about whether she was truly competent to make that plea due to her mental health history. In the video that I applied or linked in the description, it said that the judge said no to her pleading guilty because of her mental history. So yeah. So as we end this presentation, I want to say and think about this question: should there be different standards for competency to plead guilty, depending on the severity of the charges or potential penalties. So yeah, thank you for listening.